Hello and welcome. This is Hands on Health, the podcast all about living your healthiest life on the coast. I'm Austin Miller.
And I'm Alyssa Evans. Today we're sitting with Sheila Philbrick, who is the lab manager at CMH. Thanks for joining us, Sheila.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So today we'll be talking about CMH Labs in hopes that our patients can better understand what the labs are and how to use them. To start, Sheila, would you mind explaining where our CMH labs are?
Sure, we have multiple locations. One in the main hospital. We have the main laboratory and a draw station at the west lobby. We also have a draw station at the pavilion, a draw station in the park building, and then Warrenton and Seaside outreach clinics also have a draw station and laboratory.
So is that 4 or 5? I'm losing count.
There's 5.
5?
Yeah.
That's a lot for such a small area, really. That's actually a lot of labs.
Yeah, this is great spread throughout the whole Clatsop County so that, people don't have to drive as far to get their blood drawn.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned being blood drawn. So what all is then encompasses a lab? What is done in the lab?
So it really starts with the patient and an order from their provider, and then they present to an outpatient lab. And then once the sample's drawn, then it comes to the main lab where we test it, and then the results are sent back to the provider.
Are there any common tests that you usually see being done in any of the labs?
Yeah, so we have a lot of common tests. Some are the comprehensive metabolic panel, a urinalysis, a complete blood count, vitamin D, TSH. There's a lot of B12s here because there's not a lot of sunlight, things like that. Trying to think iron, TIBC, many tests.
That is a lot. That is a lot of tests. So this helps with providers to better diagnose ailments for patients then? Is that kind of the whole purpose then underlying the labs?
Exactly, yeah. So we can do the tests and we can point the providers in a direction for a clinical diagnosis. So many things can be found, just looking at a CBC or chemistry result.
That's really impressive. It's really neat to see how just a little bit of blood can go such a long way, and you can learn what your body does or doesn't do.
Exactly. And in the lab, it's a puzzle for us too, where we look at the results and then we're like, oh, hey, we need to get this to the provider right away. So it's very exciting for us.
Yeah, that's really neat.
So then who all can use the labs? Who all is able to go to the lab to have work done?
Yeah, as long as a patient has an order from a provider, they can come to the CMH lab. You can't come to the lab without a provider's order. But for COVID testing, we do have, that is allowable where we can do COVID testing without a provider order or seeing a provider. But specifically, you just have to have an order. And as long as you have that and the insurance, you should be good to go.
So follow up on that then assuming I have a referral for a lab to be done, does it matter? There's a lot of labs we have in the area. Does it matter which one patients go to?
It doesn't matter. We can draw your blood at any location, and we encourage you to go to the one that's closest to you. So if you're living in Seaside, we would encourage you to go to the Seaside lab location and get your blood drawn there. We have a courier that will bring the blood to the main lab and get tested that night.
Oh, wow. That's really neat. Are there any circumstances where patients may come in for lab testing who maybe haven't already seen a provider? And I know you mentioned COVID. Is that the only test people can get in?
Yeah, that is the only test currently we have. Someday we would like to get the health fair back again, and then we can do it without a provider there. But right now, we only accept orders from providers.
And for those who don't know, would you mind explaining what the health fair is?
Yeah, the health fair is something that you come to and you can get your blood pressure checked, and you just check your weight, your height, just to make sure you're growing okay. And then we can provide basic laboratories like a basic metabolic panel, which would have sodium, potassium chloride, things like that. The CBC, which is your complete blood count, maybe a glucose, things like that. Just some basic tests to make sure you're okay.
Do you find that people are usually very nervous to get lab work done?
Yeah, usually it's hard to get, a needle put in your arm.
Yeah, I know. I know that drawing blood can be a really, really hard thing for a lot of people. Yeah. I mean, even myself, I know I don't have a particular fear of it, but I don't think anyone really enjoys getting poked. But what do you guys do to help kind of alleviate that? I'm sure you guys see some patients who are just incredibly anxious about that.
Yeah, so we just try to talk them through the process. It's very scary, especially with children. So we just want to make sure that they know what's going to happen. We also let them know, yeah, it may hurt a little bit, but not too bad. And then just what to expect. And then the fear's taken away usually. So it is very, hard though. It's not something you enjoy coming to do.
Are there any recommendations that you have for people on how they can better care for themselves in terms of ahead of a lab appointment? If they're worried about it, if they're anxious ahead of coming?
It's really beneficial if everybody drinks a lot of water before they come, because then they're not so dehydrated and their veins will kind of what we say poof up a little bit, get bigger. So if they're dehydrated, that really does make it harder for us. I also would recommend just eating a light snack, unless you have a fasting lab, which means that you can't eat. But if you can, just eat something, because you'll just seem to handle it a little bit better with some food on your stomach. It makes you just feel a little bit better. So those are things that people could do ahead of time.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. You don't want anyone passing out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, we don't really like that, but we do have that happen, and we're prepared for when it does.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Kind of changing gears, do you mind explaining what drew you, no pun intended, what drew you into wanting to work in labs? What got you interested in the field?
Yeah. So, I've always been in healthcare. Even when I was 14, I was a certified nurse aide in the hospital in my hometown. So I always wanted to be on the healthcare path. And I worked in a nursing home, and I worked in the hospital as well. And I saw what the nurses did, and they're awesome. But I just couldn't handle some situations personally where nurses are a special person. They're beyond like a normal taking care of caregivers. And I wanted to be that person, but it was really hard for me. So I decided to go to the lab area where I still had some patient contact, but more of the science part of it. And so that's really what drew me to the lab.
I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people can say that they were working in healthcare at 14.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. My mom was the director of nursing. She's retired now. And so that was kind of just expected. Yeah.
That's really neat.
It did teach me a lot of things, and a lot of empathy for, people that are vulnerable in the healthcare. You have a lot of empathy for them. They're taken out of their environment. They're put into a hospital. People are constantly poking them, asking them to give things. And so I also learned a lot about myself, and that's why I went to the lab. So
I think that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah.
On this kind of note, what would your advice be to anyone who's thinking about going into lab work and working in that field?
Oh, I would definitely encourage it. There's a huge shortage in med techs right now. And so it's very competitive out there in the world. And if you like science and you like healthcare, it's a great option for you. And it's forever moving forward into like molecular testing, breaking up DNA, getting good results. And so I would say it's a field that's up and coming still. And it's been that way since it started. It hasn't really changed because technology just keeps improving. And so things get easier for us in the lab because we can do more things there, like diagnose. Like we have a good example is we have a respiratory panel that you can run and get 22 targets, and it can pick one of them, that you might have. And it's just very cool the way this field is going right now. Unfortunately, it's just not well known. And so there's just a huge shortage of us. So I would encourage lots of people to check us out.
Another follow-up on that, you kind of mentioned some of the advancements in the technology.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the major advancements in lab work that you've noticed in your career?
So I would say the biggest one is the molecular side. We had to do, many cultures back in the day. And now we can just run a nasal swab on an analyzer and get an answer to what bacteria it may be.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's just been in the last 10 years. Before that, we had to plate it on an auger plate, grow it for 3 or 4 days, identify it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's really just making huge advancements that way. We're trying to bring more of that here to CMH because we're in a rural community and we don't have access to a full micro department. But the more molecular we can get, the more options we can offer the community.
Wow, that is really impressive. What advancements do you hope to see in the future?
Yeah. So the biggest one we'd like to see is with urinalysis with molecular. Right now, it's really kind of out in the research area more than anything, where you can take a urine sample and then test it molecular, get an ID, and then also do susceptibility for drugs. It is out there, and we're trying to identify the best platform for us, but it's new and very exciting. So we would like to go that way with all of our cultures. So wound cultures, body fluid cultures, we would like to see a molecular path for all of those things.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Well, Sheila, I think those are the main questions that we had today. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about that we haven't gone over?
No, you guys did a great job. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Sheila.
Well, thank you for joining us today, everyone. This has been an episode of Hands on Health, brought to you by Columbia Memorial Hospital in Astoria, Oregon. CMH is an independent, not-for-profit health system that provides comprehensive, person-centered care in Northwest Oregon.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts, online at columbiamemorial.org, and on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time for another episode of Hands on Health.